Welcome to another episode of The Signal. I'm Martha DeGrasse, here for Wi-Fi Alliance. This is our podcast where we try to bring you the inside track on developments that are affecting Wi-Fi. These are meant to be smart conversations with industry leaders, and today I am delighted to be joined by Ali Youssef. He is Director of Medical Device and IoT Security at Henry Ford Health. Ali, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Martha.
It would be great if you could start off by giving us a little bit of an overview of what you do at Henry Ford Health, particularly the security aspect. I think that everybody's aware that more and more medical devices are connected now, and it's extremely important. The security requirements in a hospital setting are probably higher than almost anywhere else. So that's a really important part of your job that I think everybody's going to want to hear about.
Yeah. So my background, I am currently the medical device and IoT security director at Henry Ford. Really, I'm in charge of just ensuring that any medical devices that we use on our patients, that the risks associated with those devices or any risks posed by those devices to our patients or our institution are clearly understood and mitigated throughout their life cycle. So from when we bring them into the institution all the way until they're decommissioned. But really, the mobility aspect and why I'm talking about Wi-Fi and really mobile medical devices specifically, I think. So my prior background was the principal mobility and digital health architect for Henry Ford. And that's kind of what drew me into mobile medical devices and IoT more specifically. That captured my interest. But yeah, I've been working with Wi-Fi since around 2005. I'm originally a biomedical engineer, so I started my career designing medical devices and kind of made this transition. But really, I think the unique RF, functional, and security challenges with medical devices and IoT devices have really captured my interest. Like you touched on, it's such an interesting niche just to have insight into because it poses such a fundamental risk to one of our most critical types of institutions.
Absolutely. And for anybody who's not familiar with Henry Ford Health, can you give us a quick overview of the institution?
Sure, yeah. So we're based in Detroit, in the Detroit area, really southeast Michigan. We have several large hospitals and around, I think, over 100 clinics throughout that region, around 30,000 employees. And I think one of the other interesting tidbits is the original institution in Detroit was founded in 1915 by Henry Ford himself, and it has grown from there.
And can you give us an idea of the size or like about how many people are seen there?
Essentially it's around 2,600 beds, I think, in total between all the different hospitals in that region. And we have a variety of specialties, I think.
Okay. And it sounds like you've been there for a number of years. Can you kind of describe the evolution of connectivity? Obviously it captured your interest, but it's a growing area. Can you kind of describe what you've seen at Henry Ford Health?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. I think, when I first started, my primary interest was Wi-Fi. And I think at Henry Ford and at other institutions around the country, people were just scratching the surface and really tinkering with Wi-Fi at that point in time. But in around 2009, there was a push for meaningful use, meaning now all healthcare institutions were being provided with incentives to migrate to electronic medical records. And as soon as that came about, really a bunch of funding became available for the required infrastructure to make that happen. And that included wired as well as wireless infrastructure. So it was interesting. That was one of the catalysts, I think, where we started to see just a major amount of essentially everything starting to rely on that central network as the core. It was there before, but now there were so many additional use cases that were being added to that equation. But yeah, Wi-Fi had been around for around a decade by then. So we were just starting to see, I think, Wi-Fi 4 by around 2009. And we started seeing more interesting use cases emerging. It wasn't just, we're tinkering with this interesting connectivity now. We could actually do some interesting things with it in a medical setting. So the first focus was improving clinical outcomes and really just patient care, I think, directly. But as the technology evolved, we started looking at patient experience. You'll hear a lot of talk now about concierge experience to our patients, leveraging mobility in the hospital. And of course, as you know, with COVID, that kind of accelerated it, especially on the telemedicine front. Now, where we were crawling before, we had to immediately begin running in that space. So that was an interesting shift as well.
Absolutely. Can you give us some specific examples of the types of connected devices that you're using?
Sure, yeah, it's a plethora of different types of devices, and they range from what's interesting, it's a variety of device types. We have employee devices, we have medical devices, IoT devices, which could sometimes fall into both of those categories. One of our most heavily used networks is actually the guest network. We liken ourselves to a small ISP, just based on the number of users on that network. And we also have real-time location services and other type voice and other types of networks as well in that space. But yeah, from a medical device standpoint, I mean, it ranges from glucometers to vital patient monitors to much more invasive or many more invasive types of devices like pacemakers and things of that nature.
All connected to Wi-Fi?
In a lot of cases, yes, either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth.
Gotcha. Okay, and what are some of the challenges that come with maintaining all that connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main challenges is really the right hand. When it comes to developing medical devices and using them, there are two main parties involved in that equation. You have the manufacturer and then you have the healthcare delivery organization. Mm-hmm. And although the FDA is playing a major role on the medical device manufacturer end of things, you'll see they've had a lot of recent publications around cybersecurity in that space, and they're mostly guidelines. They're not even mandates. There's no one addressing the healthcare delivery organization end of things. So there are some guidelines, but really none of them have, it's neither a carrot nor a stick today. It's almost something you can adopt on your own, just knowing what's coming down the pipe, basically. But really, there's no mandate. There's no one making sure that that piece is happening. So that's been, I think, one of the main challenges at a high level. From a device standpoint, the challenges are, these devices are designed for medical care. I used to be one of these engineers that designed medical devices, and network connectivity was the least of my concerns. I wanted to make sure that it was an IV pump I was working on at the time. I was concerned with the flow rate, occlusion pressure, things like that. Will the device alarm appropriately if something happens and the line is kinked or something like that? And I think that's the same with other biomed engineers that are designing these devices. They're concerned about the clinical efficacy, and they're not as concerned about cybersecurity or network connectivity. That's starting to change now, but we still deal with devices on a daily basis that are running antiquated operating systems. We have devices running Windows XP as the underlying operating system. That hasn't been supported for many years at this point. And then there are other proprietary operating systems that don't allow antivirus. They don't allow adding any sort of supplemental software to address cybersecurity on that device. Things that we're used to doing in the IT world, we cannot do on these types of devices because of the patient care component. Because the last scenario anyone needs is essentially having a device connected to a patient fail because the antivirus all of a sudden eats up the CPU capacity or something like that. So I think we're really careful from that standpoint. And even when we do find vulnerabilities, it's not always possible to patch them right away. It takes time. You have to coordinate with the manufacturer. In some cases, they have to coordinate with the FDA to get the appropriate approval to go through with it. So it's not as simple as dealing with traditional IT assets.
That's really interesting. So from a security perspective, what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things, essentially. Radio frequency coexistence is one of the things that keeps me up at night. So as we keep introducing more and more RF devices, and with the reliance on Bluetooth now, the security aspects really need to be scrutinized, and the RF needs to be scrutinized in the sense that it doesn't cause any coexistence issues. So different frequencies aren't stepping on each other, essentially, as they're used in the same airspace.
That's an interference concern. Is that also a security concern, though?
So basically, the way it touches on security is the availability of a particular device, right? Because if it's not available for use, because it's not able to transmit data, that's essentially where it touches on security. But the other component, you're absolutely right, is its confidentiality and integrity of the data on our network and on the medical device. So really, the fundamental security of the devices and making sure that we can detect if they're tampered with before they're used on a patient. That's my nightmare scenario, is having a nurse go up and program an IV pump, thinking she's doing her job or his job the appropriate way, and then all of a sudden, programming it correctly and then having the pump do something different than what it's programmed to do. I think that would be my nightmare scenario, and likely a nightmare scenario for nursing, the clinician, because I mean, we're in the business of helping people and trying to improve their lives, not introduce more problems.
But that's not something that you hear about happening. It's not a typical cybersecurity hack that we hear about, right? So it's not something we need to be super worried about, right?
You're right. Yeah, we haven't had a lot of instances in the wild of these types of events. They're mostly disclosed by independent security researchers. On occasion at a hacking conference, someone might illustrate how to do it. But you're right. I mean, the concern from a health system standpoint is having one of these devices be a beachhead to ransomware or something like that. So having it be the first step in, and then having lateral movement from there.
Oh, okay. Have there been any examples of that ever happening in a hospital that you've heard about?
I don't know that they've ever linked it directly, but I've read several studies out there where, based on the vulnerabilities of these devices, I think they have tracked down ways where people have come in using an IoT device or a medical device into the institution. Not our institution, but I mean just in general, into a healthcare institution. I just don't know if there's been a linkage made between a direct ransomware attack and that entry point. So.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about Wi-Fi 6E and the advantages that it brings to the healthcare setting.
Sure, yeah. So Wi-Fi 6E is a game changer, I think, for us, as it is for other institutions. And the really interesting thing, I don't recall which FCC chairman said, spectrum is oxygen several years ago. I think it was Julius
Wheeler.
Maybe it was
Jarenkowski.
Maybe Jarenkowski.
Yeah.
But that really caught my attention, and this is a perfect example of that. Wi-Fi 6E is not about really additional features. The key differentiator is the spectrum that's being introduced. It opens up a whole new highway for us now for all these advanced things that we would have liked to do, but we've been waiting on, essentially, because of the current limitations. So it's very exciting. I love the fact that it's not designed. Many of our handicaps today really have to do with accommodating for legacy devices on the network. You might have to turn off certain features because a certain handset can't support it or something like that. Or maybe you cannot use certain channels that are a certain width because the device can't support it in certain scenarios. But with Wi-Fi 6, the really nice thing now is it's a totally new highway. And really the cars going on that highway are all new cars. The people who designed it weren't restricted to having to accommodate legacy technologies, basically. It's all brand new, that's fantastic.
Excellent. I love your analogies. Okay, what about the additional security features with 6E?
Sure, yeah. So one of the key features is not having, so I think I haven't mentioned WPA3 specifically, but one of the key features is WPA3 is mandated for Wi-Fi 6E. And there's no backwards compatibility support for WPA2, which is fantastic. I mean, we don't have to accommodate legacy anymore. We're starting with a clean slate, essentially. So some of the things that introduces are, like, for example, management frame protection is required in the 6 gigahertz band. And there are some other small advantages that make it more difficult to do offline dictionary attacks and things like that. So it's inherently more secure than the other Wi-Fi protocols, essentially. And the really nice thing is this can coexist with the other protocols. It's just a different radio, dedicated to 6E, dedicated to that frequency. But that doesn't mean that you're getting rid of all your legacy. They're just on different dedicated highways, basically, that are not interfering with this one in any way, shape, or form. So.
Okay, good. Is there anything particular that people need to keep in mind when they're upgrading existing spaces with legacy gear and adding in Wi-Fi 6E?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It really depends on, I think, what your current implementation looks like. So you really have to take into account what types of clients you have in your environment. I'll give you an example. So 802.11b, or what used to be called 802.11b, right, the first Wi-Fi standard, it wasn't until recently, the last few years, that we were able to take that off the table completely and say, we're not supporting these clients anymore. I mean, imagine, it's been almost 20 years, right? More than 20 years. And yet some of these types of clients are still supported. So I think that's the first thing, is you need to be aware of what clients are on your network, and you need to accommodate and make sure that you continue supporting them until they can be phased out slowly or over time. And the other thing is, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach. So the way I look at it is we can have pockets of 6E coverage to accommodate certain high-tech areas in the hospital. Maybe the radiology department needs that capability in the short term. As we look to the long term to upgrade our entire network, it doesn't need to be a complete rip and replace today. Now, if you're building a new facility, then absolutely deploy Wi-Fi 6E. There's no need to deploy anything older because you can accommodate all the other devices. You're not giving that up essentially. So,
okay, Ali, this has been fantastic. Last question. How do you see Wi-Fi 6E and next generation Wi-Fi impacting the future of healthcare facilities?
Yeah, the thing I'm excited most about is telemedicine, augmentation, home care. We're starting to work with the hospital at home scenario. So literally setting up a mock hospital bed in someone's home. So I'm excited about the potential in that setting. And then voice technologies, being able to support more video. One of the things that came up with COVID was in order to preserve PPE, many different hospitals started looking at installing cameras in patient rooms. So a nurse could monitor 20 patients at once without having to go into each room. And so I think being able to facilitate that type of technology and telemedicine and just more advanced like video use cases, augmented reality, I'm really excited about the potential of those types of technologies that they don't seem feasible today, but I think with 6E they will be because it's a completely clean spectrum that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's going to make a big difference for a lot of people. All right, Ali Youssef, Director of Medical Device and IoT Security at Henry Ford Health. Thank you so much for joining us on The Signal.
All right, yeah, thank you.
And that is our show. Thanks for listening to The Signal, and don't forget to check the show notes for more resources on the topics we discussed today. I know that Ali's got some great articles and background that he's adding to that, so you'll definitely want to check that out. As always, for all things Wi-Fi Alliance, visit y-fi.org, that's wi-fi.org, or connect with us on social. I'm Martha DeGrasse. Thanks again for listening to The Signal, and please join us next time.